Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Trevor's Phone Reviews, and in today's review we're looking at the Sony action camera, the HDR AS15, that can now shoot 1080p at 60 frames per second with a firmware update that I did last night. So we're going to test it out and see if it's better than the 1080p at 30 frames per second, or if it's just not really 1080p at 60 frames per second. So we're going to get right into the review right now. Hey guys, we're looking at the Sony action camera, the HDR AS15, that now does 1080p at 60 frames per second. Or is it just scaled up from 1080p 30 frames per second to make it look like it is 1080p 60 frames per second? But it does have two dual stereo microphones. We will test the audio, the image stabilization, and just show you what it looks like. So if you guys want to pick one up, you can get them on the cheap. They are similar to the GoPro Hero White Edition. They're the low end action cameras by Sony. So here we go. Okay, right now we're shooting it at full 1080p 30 frames per second, and we're going to switch over to full 1080p 60 frames per second, both shooting in at 120 degrees. So can you guys see a noticeable difference? Me personally, I really don't see anything that's popping out that's like, well, this is really 1080p 60 frames per second. What is up guys, this is a full 1080p at 60 frames per second test versus the full 1080p at 30 frames per second test. So I'm not exactly sure until I get this back on the computer if there's any noticeable difference. The only thing I noticed is when you do the full 1080p at 60 frames per second, it looks like on the app the image is a little bit further out. Instead of 120, it's about like 140 wide angle. So I don't know if that's just my perception or if that's just the way the app's making it look, but it does look like the image is a little bit further out. So we are doing the 1080p at 30 frames per second right now, so I don't know if there's a big huge difference in quality or not, but I know I'm in a dark area, so you're probably not getting the best visual lighting on me, because sometimes these action cameras have a problem when they're in a little bit dark environment that they don't pick up everything around very sharply. Even the GoPro has this problem, so don't just think it's a Sony action camera. But this is firmware 3.0 on the action camera. So if you guys do have an action camera or any kind of camera that matter, I recommend you guys actually going out and getting a firmware software update for your camera, because it could make a big difference. Like this, it does 1080p at 60 frames per second now. But I do notice the quality is a little bit sharper at 1080p 60 frames per second. I'm not exactly sure if it's upscaling, but you can definitely tell when this car goes by, it's very smooth compared to the 1080p 30 frames per second. You can definitely see it's a very more smoother view than the 1080p 30. And now what I'm about to do is show you at 720p at 30 frames per second, 1080p at 60 frames per second, and also at 1080p 30 frames per second. See if there is a huge noticeable difference, because these are the three major frame rates you can record on this camera now. So we'll see what it does. And this is shooting 720p 30 frames per second right now. And this is the audio test of the Sony action camera, the HDR AS15. It has dual stereo microphones, and I'll say this, I think it has better audio than the GoPro from what I heard. I've never used the GoPro personally, but I'm just going off the test that I've seen online. I know the new GoPros, the Hero 4 Plus Black Edition, has really good mics, but this mic on this action camera sounds pretty decent, and it does have, like I said, two stereo microphones in the front of the camera, and it can hook up an external microphone like a lavalier mic, and that's what I normally use, is a lavalier mic. And this is shooting 1080p at 60 frames per second. So on YouTube, click the 60 frames per second button so you can watch it in full resolution. So now we're looking at the one on the left is shooting in at full 1080p at 60 frames per second, and the one on the right is full 1080p. So is there really a big noticeable difference in quality, guys? But maybe it's just me, I can't really tell the difference between the 1080p 60 or the 1080p 30 frames per second. Let me know if you can tell in the comments below. So overall, I would recommend you guys still shooting full 1080p 60 frames per second. It's just going to be a little bit sharper than the 1080p 30 frames per second. So with 1080p 60 frames per second, you can slow down your frame like I did there, and it makes it really smooth slow motion and not very choppy. So if you want to slow your footage down to make it slow motion, you could do that. So thanks for watching today's video. And as always, hit that like button, subscribe button, and I'll definitely see you guys soon. Bye bye.